In this atmosphere, the Ukrainian friends whom I got to meet there just a couple of days ago, they start telling stories about their friends and close relatives being killed in the Donbas conflict. And, not that I haven't heard of that before, not that I haven't encountered that in news and stuff, but that was such a direct connection and experience that the very next day I woke up with this completely irrational feeling that I can't afford not to do something about it. Relationally speaking, we are all in these bubbles, and most of us, I would say, kept intimate relationships only with those with whom we are on the same page here. The regime still holds on being passive, so it still doesn't want people to be active, even if they are actively supporting the war. It still prefers them to be just, leave us do our own thing. Whenever I face this dilemma of fearfully hiding my position or being open about it, I try to choose and prefer the second one for my own sake. Not for justice, not even for it's not even a moral thing, it's just my way of remaining in my power, of feeling that I can afford and be courageous enough and powerful enough to do that. So it's kind of saving myself.
Hello everyone, this is Maz. As you will notice, I'm publishing the following conversation with Vlad Sakovich, a Russian peace activist, complete on the public channel. While some will undoubtedly judge Vlad, and probably me, as somehow being Kremlin apologists, I ask you to listen to the full interview to hear about the challenges faced by those in Russia who oppose the invasion of Ukraine. In this conversation, you will hear from one of the very few courageous and extraordinarily brave Russians who are doing whatever they can to increase the consciousness within Russia about the war that is carried out in their name. I conducted this interview with Vlad for a very simple reason. I want to bring to light the fact that there are at least some in Russia who are choosing to reject the dominant narrative and who are fighting in the best way they know how. And while it is undoubtedly true that Vlad and those he works with are a minority, I hope that this interview can highlight the complexities and risks involved in standing up against a powerful regime. It's a testament to the resilience and courage of individuals who, despite the odds, are striving for a more ethical and peaceful future. Lastly, and unrelated to my interview with Vlad, I just want to remind you of an initiative I mentioned in our latest newsletter. Namely, my friends over at Into.coms are hosting a content creator contest themed Confronting the Climate Crisis. Into.coms is welcoming entries that show how individuals, societies, and organizations are dealing with climate change, either in their daily lives or in their work. There are 3 main categories open for submissions: photography, video, and AI-generated images. To find out more about this excellent initiative, please follow the link in the show notes. And if you're not on the newsletter distro list, please go to our website to register. Okay, now let's dive into my conversation with Vlad Sakovich, a peace activist from Moscow. My guest today is Vlad Sakovich, who is speaking with me today from Moscow. Vlad is a Russian educator, psychologist, and interpreter, but who has, since the 2014 Donbas War and Crimea's annexation, found himself at the intersection of pacifism, anti-militarism, and anti-war activism. Since then, he has led grassroots dialogue initiatives, explored topics of collective trauma and conflict facilitation, and has grown networks within the sparse Russian anti-war movement, as well as with colleagues from Ukraine, Belarus, Finland, and Sweden. In response to the February 22 Russian invasion, Vlad started facilitating open forums, which are online semi-psychological dialogue spaces for Russians to discuss various topics related to the war. With a group of colleagues, he also runs an online course on civic facilitation, which explores ways to foster and support difficult civic dialogue in society. Vlad chose to stay in Moscow with his family, despite the risk associated with his work, as this allows him to remain connected to the local sentiment, and in particular those who, like him, work quietly in the background to change the Russian narrative surrounding this war. Vlad joins me today to discuss how everyday Russians perceive this war, as well as to discuss his efforts and those he works with in creating spaces for dialogue. I must highlight that Vlad is joining me using his real name, which is a very courageous act, especially given how any who question the Russian regime are treated in Russia. On that note, Vlad, it's a real privilege to speak with you. Thank you for joining me on the Voices of War.
Thank you for asking to come and inviting me.
Vlad, given your background, I think I must start with asking about your own motivations to do the work that you do. So maybe we can start with you sharing the moment you realized you wanted to be actively involved in anti-war activism. Was it a gradual process for you, or was there a specific incident that ignited your passion for this type of work?
Yeah, it actually was a series of incidents, even if it might be the case that I was kind of, gradually getting ready for that, but then something sparks it and it happens. And when I think of it, I just imagine myself, before I got into this topic and into the sphere. And I guess it's a picture that's definitely familiar for many in Russia and maybe over the world as well. Mm-hmm. When I considered myself to be an activist, in a sense that most of my work and most of my projects, they had this flair of changing society and working with people towards, how they build the community and stuff. Mm-hmm. And never did I engage with politics. And, I always, that's also a feature of my generation, but also, the way it was in the atmosphere in Russia back then, I guess in the early 2010s, complete mistrust to any kind of politics and politicians, complete mistrust that anything can be changed by politics, that it's just, the game running out there and you cannot really influence it. So the only way you can change stuff is, dealing directly with people, with societies, with communities, with the perception, with the culture. So on this level. And after 2014, I still stayed in this position for a while. I was opposed to annexation of Crimea. I was against it, but kind of passively and quietly, and still doing my own thing. Okay, here I am within the education domain, working with people, psychology, this, that, and I'm against this, but not much.
But it's happening. Yeah.
It's happening. And that was still the time when you could post on Facebook how much you are against it and stuff, when it wasn't criminalized. And then I remember I was participating in an international conference, Integral European Conference, with people all over the world, also mostly in the domains of psychology and integral work and working with communities and stuff. Mm-hmm. And there were maybe 500 people there in the conference. It was in Hungary. Mm-hmm. And it so happened there was a Ukrainian delegation there, and I just, clicked with the person from Ukraine. She was a mediator, and we just matched, and we were so much on the same vibe, on like-minded, soulmates from the first minute we spoke. And it was such a strong feeling. I mean, really this getting together and be I know exactly what you feel. I know exactly what you think. And it was this complete, fit. And it really felt like, meeting a soulmate, which happens sometimes, happened definitely in my life, and it was throughout the conference. And then I remember us sitting on the last day of on the last night of the conference. It's all over, and we are basically waiting for the buses to take us to the airport. And suddenly the Crimea gets into our conversation. And the resonance we had and the fit and staying on the same page feeling we had all the days throughout the conference, just in a second it blows away. And we are so triggered, and she's very much triggered, and I'm against the annexation and stuff, but I'm just trying to stay in the position that it's actually complicated, and I don't see realistic ways how Russia can return Crimea right now given the circumstances and how it can be done and the people who stayed there and stuff. And she's and boom.
Yeah. Everything was
and that really struck me, the way the connection broke. But that was still not the point. That just kind of, shocked me and just was, completely in my face. And then that woman, she actually invited me just in a couple of weeks to attend the conference in Switzerland, which was basically a gathering of more or less, I could say, peace activists and peace builders. It was an NGO working for dialogue and peace and stuff for quite some time, I guess from after the Second World War. And there I went. She actually didn't. She couldn't because of other reasons. And there was a Ukrainian delegation there as well. And well, we had different kind of talks and processes and master classes and this and that. And then also the last day, the last night of the conference, and we happened to be sitting outside of the venue, me and most of the Ukrainian delegation, in this very communion kind of setting. We took a guitar, we had a campfire, we had some wine, we sang songs by guitar. I sang a song that I wrote myself, which was very also touching and sincere and vulnerable and stuff. Wow. And we were also so much together in this, and there was nothing to split us apart. And then in this atmosphere, the Ukrainian friends whom I got to meet there just a couple of days ago, they start telling stories about their friends and close relatives being killed in the Donbas conflict. And, well, not that I haven't heard of that before, not that I haven't encountered that in news and stuff, but that was such a direct connection and experience that the very next day I woke up with this completely irrational feeling that I can't afford not to do something about it. And I had no idea what to do. And then I got back to Russia and I started just brainstorming and trying this and that and trying to gather the anti-war activists or do some master classes or do this or that. So it was kind of a random search, especially in the beginning. But that was the moment when I was like, I have to do something about it. I have no idea what, but...
That's hugely powerful for a number of reasons. Firstly, I just want to pick out one thing you raised, and that is that you clicked firstly with the Ukrainian lady at the first conference, and then of course with the Ukrainian delegation. What did you click over? As in, what was it that bonded you? What were the recognitions that that echoed, I guess, between the two, let's call them sides, right? Because at that point in time, there probably weren't sides. You kind of felt probably like one people, like, I guess. And I can relate to, I guess, Serbs and Croats that I have met throughout my time. When you say the guitar and that sort of stuff, I can relate to that point a lot. But I just want to tease out some of those points about what were the points of recognition and the points of, I guess, where you clicked and gelled.
Oh, that's a good question. On one hand, I guess that's just something that happened with people, whatever their country of origin or nation or background is. For me, just this recognition of a very much like-minded person with a similar background who just, I don't know, when we were sitting on the discussion tables on the conference or something, and we had like completely similar reaction and response to what's happening, often the times critical, by the way, and even sarcastic, I would say. But there was also something about cultural similarity. And that's a tricky area to speak about, in the current context. Because now when you speak about the closeness and similarity of Russian and Ukrainian culture, that's the way you start touching this colonial space of like, this is the very approach Russia started the invasion with. But that's also true. And there was this cultural similarity among us, which kind of brought us together, especially in the international context when there are people all over the globe and we know that we are here together. Just doesn't mean, like we were much closer than me with other Russian delegates on the conference. So it's mostly, personal. Yeah. But there was this cultural closeness as well.
That's interesting that
deny it.
Again, it's an interesting point. So it strikes me that there's a particular distinction between you and the rest of the Russian delegation. So then maybe it's a more personal question also, whilst acknowledging that there is the cultural similarities which are undeniable. And again, I can draw examples about the Bosnian context. Culturally, we are so similar to Serbs next door, to Croats to the northwest. There's no question of that. There's no denying it. When it was Yugoslavia, we all sang the same songs. We all had the same love for the same bands, etc., etc., etc. So those ties are very, very strong. But the point you made is that perhaps it was that you were somehow more forward-leaning, or perhaps you had a different your perspective to the rest of the Russian delegation. I want to pick that out a little bit. Was that the case? Did I misunderstand? And if not, if indeed it was the case, what makes the difference? Why were you different to the rest of the Russian delegation?
I mean, this is just the way we are different with most of the people, I guess. It wasn't something extraordinary or exceptional.
Do you have any background? Do you have your personal background, personal experience, much closer connection to Ukraine and Ukrainians?
No, not much, not really.
No.
I guess it was what really, kind of distanced me from, let's say, the rest of the Russian delegation on the conference was my weird, in a sense, trickstery background. Like for most of my life and most of my career, I stayed out of this official path. So I rarely, just once in my life, I was officially employed, and I always worked in projects and independent teams and horizontal communities and stuff like that. Also being this romantic kind of a guy trying to change the world and trying to change the society. Having kind of a disrespect for money and careerism and stuff. And most of Russian delegations, they were from a very famous Russian psychological institute with all the certificates and stuff. And they were like, we were.
Yeah.
So okay. that's. But there were people like that from the rest of the countries as well. I don't know. There was something about us. She was a mediator, and she was into dialogue and how to make dialogue and how to make connection and how to. And she actually worked, because it was already a couple of years of the Donbas conflict going on. So she actually worked on the front line trying to do some grassroots dialogue initiatives for people in Donbas from the east and from the west and stuff. She was polarized, but she also were trying to go deeper underneath the typically perceived layers of what was going on. And the thing is, since we already got personal, I just want to mention that the cycle also kind of closed, because last year, I guess it was half a year after the invasion started, that person, the Ukrainian mediator, she died. And she wasn't killed in the conflict directly. She died of disease. But that also, that was partially connected to the difficulties in supplies of medicine in Ukraine and stuff. So, it's still and she was very much emotionally involved, obviously, and engaged with working with the civic society in Ukraine, working with volunteers, helping the Ukrainian army and stuff. So that obviously kind of stressed her and burned her out. So in a sense, although not directly, I feel that the war killed her. And, that's a heavy plate in my heart, to be honest.
And there's also perhaps a dark symbology in that, because it was, post the kind of first few months or weeks even of the war, that any hope of a peaceful resolution or Russian withdrawal or even potentially Russian defeat on the Eastern Front or around the Donbas kind of died, and therefore also any hope of dialogue, kind of negotiations, etc. Perhaps didn't die, but it certainly dwindled off into the distance as the war escalated.
Indeed, yeah.
So perhaps there's some dark symbolism there as well. So then, if we can move on to, I guess, your career and your path, what is the work that you ended up doing, and what is the work that you do now? And what does that work hope to achieve in a country like Russia?
Yeah. So I would really say it's a rather, many different directions and tries and trials. I cannot really call it a single comprehensive piece of work.
I understand that.
Unfortunately, and maybe inevitably. So in the first, those years after I returned from the conference, being convinced that I need to do something, and until the invasion, that was a series of different initiatives and projects. Some of them were also kind of symbolic. For instance, I remember like we had this annual celebration in Russia on the 9th of May, which is the Victory Day in Russia in the well, they call it the Great Patriotic War within the Second World War framework. And, more and more with years, and especially after the Crimea annexation, the celebration became just so much militarized with this victorious feeling. I mean, it used to be, as far as I remember, and as far as I've been told, for a while, it used to be more of a, tragedy, recalling the tragedy and
honoring the
people
fallen
who passed and stuff, kind of a day. Yeah. And but the trend towards glorification of the victory in the Second World War was already there for a very long time, but after the Crimea annexation, the whole propaganda and militarization and this military victory feeling in the atmosphere just been pumped up by the government in like many folds, that just dramatically jumped. And so I remember on one of the years, I guess it was 2017 or 18 or something, on the 9th of May, we wanted to do something else as an kind of an act of opposition to what was going on the streets and squares. So instead, we gathered all the anti-military activists we found in St. Petersburg. Back then, I was living in St. Petersburg. And there wasn't a lot. I mean, there were maybe 40, 50 of us. And some initiatives weren't even anti-military or anti-war. I mean, some of them, well, there was not such thing as anti-war pacifist movement in Russia as a coherent thing. But there were definitely initiatives who kind of fall into this category once they start, thinking in this framework. For instance, there were the movement of conscientious objectors for people who try to not go to the,
to military.
There was a project called the Irene's Fires, which basically was an art project after the Crimea annexation for people to try to, in the art form, express their protest against what was going on. There were the Soldiers' Mothers project, and there is still, who also tried to help those recruits in the army. Feminists obviously were kind of into the topic. LGBTQ movement also kind of got involved, obviously. And there was this vibe which connected us, even though many of us didn't call ourselves anti-military or anti-war or pacifist movement. And so we were just brainstorming and connecting and trying to build the network, which I guess wasn't there before. So it was also the time this initiative started to meet and network and build connections and somehow feel together, which I feel, I mean, that's not thanks to just me doing a couple of that events. Obviously, that was a trend. But now when the invasion started and many people migrated and left the country, I see that those communities and movements and teams which were apart, they consolidated and they started feeding themselves like a coherent movement, which I guess was already preparing in these years. It was going on for a while.
And it basically escalated 22 onwards.
Obviously.
Because it kind of had to. Yeah.
Then I remember I had this very interesting event I attended as a participant, but also one of the trainers. So there was this. They called it the peace training as opposed to the military training. So it was a project initiated by a Swedish peace activist, one of the leaders of the Swedish pacifist movement. His name is Pelle. And so that was the time when those who could identify as peace activists from Sweden, Finland, Russia, and Ukraine got together for 2 years. That was happening, that gathering.
Wow.
And that was very interesting. I mean, like meeting together, discussing, being in this group process of, on the one side, feeling that we ought to be and we inevitably need to be. Well, there is an interesting paradox we found out there. On the one side, as a peace movement, we can only be peace movement if we are global, if we are international, if we are not restricted to our countries, but if we are opposed the war as a means to, to do business between countries and between communities and people globally. So there cannot be Russian peace movement or Ukrainian peace movement or American peace movement. It could be only peace movement as a whole.
So it's immediately...
But it's very...
It's antithetical to nationalism, just by its nature.
By its nature, right. And at the same time, the only way peace movement can influence what's going on is by influencing it in their own countries and opposing the military rhetoric and politics in their own countries. Well, in the democratic countries, they can do it by just, acting and lobbying and trying to influence the societal opinions and stuff. In other countries, they, have to find different solutions, but they can only do it in their own countries.
Yeah.
And therefore, in each and single country, they will be treated as the traitors and as those serving the other countries.
Side. Yeah, that's right.
Obviously.
Yeah.
So we had these peace activists in Sweden being called the traitors and servants of Putin, and peace activists in Russia being treated and called the servants of NATO, even though we were like the same movement. So that's also kind of an inevitable dilemma here.
Yeah.
And that's why it was also important to meet together and to see it as a whole.
I wonder how you see that as a psychologist, because to me there's a lot of social psychology in that, and a sense of group belonging, social identity, all of these kind of things that the narratives that you have to embrace if you are to feel a sense of belonging, or if you are to belong, then you even have to accept all of these additional narratives, some of which you might not even agree with, but you do that at the cost of not being ostracized. Because I imagine, if you, in particular, and this is perhaps leading to a question about the circumstances in Russia right now, I imagine if you publicly speak against the war and the invasion, there's a high risk of being ostracized, even if there is a number of people that might hear you who might quietly agree with you. Because if you are, it's the exit costs are so great that keeps people locked in to a particular narrative. I wonder what you think as a psychologist about that, but also maybe then we can transition into what you see in Russia at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. Well, I could say that if you publicly speak against the war in Russia today, it's not just high risk that you're going to be ostracized. It's
it's prison
inevitability.
Well,
not really. Mm-hmm. For sure, you're going to be ostracized. That's like not question.
Right.
It's not a chance. It will happen. For sure, there will be those who support you quietly, or like less quietly, or more quietly. That's also for sure. And then there is a chance you'll get to prison. So you see, I do this whole work. It's not really public in a sense that I go to the news and media and scream about it, and here it is. But neither do I really have a huge concern of hiding it.
Okay.
So for instance, this open forums I do, I kind of make a public post and just send it to the channels which are close to me and with the people I know and more or less familiar. And I say, you know what, you can forward it to the people you also know, or to the channels and groups you also know, and let other people come. So it's like kind of this semi-public domain where you don't just post it out for everyone to see, but neither do you really hide it, because you want to find this balance. Otherwise, which also happened to this open forums, just the same people, like-minded, who trust each other and know each other, keep coming, and then you are enclosing yourself in this
selective group.
Which I guess one of the in a sense, that is the biggest trend, something that is hardest to overcome in the modern Russia, as far as I see. Well, many things as well, obviously, but this enclosure in your bubble, informational bubble, and those who are with you. Well, previously it was like maybe on different topics, but nowadays that's the topic.
Yeah.
So all of us just are so much in this bubble that it takes so much effort, even if you dare to try to get out of it. Not in a sense, I mean, it's easy to get out. You just go to the streets and you see, for instance, me being in this anti-war bubble. I leave the apartment, I see the posters, I see the propaganda, TV, people talking on that. But it's so difficult to really approach and get into any kind of relationships once you see this split. So relationally speaking, we are all in these bubbles, and most of us, I would say, kept intimate relationships only with those with whom we are on the same page here. And interestingly, once you get into this bubble of, let's say, anti-war people, those who support the war or support the regime are sure to be ostracized there once they speak publicly as well.
So it goes both ways.
Everyone just feel it in the air. I mean, that's once you're somewhere, you're more or less sure what kind of attitude is here in the group. It's like pro-war, it's anti-war, so you don't dare to speak otherwise. And that's a huge civic polarization.
Yeah.
You go on.
No, I was just going to say, you probably won't be surprised to hear that that kind of the bubbling effect and the kind of stovepiping of information, it's not just a Russian problem, it's a global problem. We see this everywhere, right, with these kind of competing narratives. And in this post-truth world where everything can be true, where there's evidence for every side of the debate, every point of view, and everyone's opinion is equally valuable, or can be shared as wide and as publicly as the next person's. And I guess that's a problem partially due to technology, but also because we've been globally left disappointed by our political elite. So, you made the point about Russians and people like yourself who've stopped believing in politics or stopped believing in the politics actually acting in the interest of the people, which is, I think, something that broadly resonates with, certainly will with most of my Western audience, that there is this kind of, that's the kind of populist movement, is to resist and stand up against the betrayals, so to say, of the political elite. In Russia, I guess, there's a layer over the top of that, that is
there is
the cost that comes with standing up. So maybe my question is then, gauging knowing what you know about Russian society, especially given that you live in Moscow, how big is this movement or how many people actually believe that the war is unjust, that the war shouldn't go on, and would identify as, I guess, anti-war, broadly speaking? How prominent is that opinion?
Well, no one can really say as of now, because of obvious reasons. You cannot really conduct a comprehensive research and once you try to just calculate your own feeling about it, well, you are just judging by your own bubble. Well, more or less, the independent research groups which I know and more or less trust, which were trying to somehow estimate it in the last year, I would say. They tend to say that we have this 15 to 20% active war supporters, 15 to 20% active war opposers, and then the rest who are more or less indifferent and just want, the life to be normal as it was once again.
So the standard bell curve applies.
Yeah.
Kind of. Yeah, 68% are just, just close your eyes and try to ignore as much as you can.
Yeah, then obviously there is this tendency that on the one side, many of those who are against the war left the country. And so they are within the informational field, they keep the connections and stuff, but still they're out of country. And then those who support the war obviously occupy like 95% of the official public domain. Would it be media, TV, news, any public kind of spaces and platforms, events? Well, censorship piece has obvious dynamics and mechanics here.
Yeah.
So we have this asymmetry. And then there are all these, those are just two labels, right? Or three labels.
Yeah.
Against, pro, or indifferent. But then obviously there are these shades and colors and all the different pictures in between. Uh, yeah, I guess I can talk more about them, but if
no,
the
please do,
somehow
because I think I really do think that's an important aspect because it's ultimately going to be those that are, the marginals that are going to eventually shift the narrative one way or the other, right? Because there are, as you said, there are the 10-15% competing on either side, the extremes, so to say, and it's going to be the swing voters that are ultimately going to, push the narrative one way or the other. So it'd be keen to hear, about them, who they are, and what's keeping them locked into in their own bubbles, or not allowing them to step out into the other bubbles.
Yeah. Well, let's say, for instance, if you try to imagine this war supporters camp, initially this picture comes to mind of I guess that's also a picture by largely drawn and pictured by the anti-war people and like just at each other, putting labels on each other. So the picture comes to mind of this just propaganda, brainwashed, critical thinking absent people, mostly elders. And that's to some extent true. I mean, I've just recently had an old lady who is a very active, also kind of an activist of the local area I live in here in Moscow, who tries to lobby opening new social centers here and there, and maybe, I don't know, getting better infrastructure and stuff. And so she came to promote voting for the leading party at the upcoming elections here in Moscow. And I was like, I'm sorry, I cannot vote for the party because I think those are the party of the people who voted for war and genocide and war crimes and stuff. So it really doesn't make much sense to me. And she was like, oh no, why do you believe that? And I was like, and why do you believe that? She was like, well, but because Putin said so, because TV said so. And that was just completely within this picture. And she was a very kind and good and good intended lady who just follows the narrative which she hears from the news and TV and stuff. And that fits the picture. Okay. Then there are people who are actually quite intelligent and who have access and who do read different kind of news and media and sources of information, and they are not that stupid to just believe what the defense ministry in Russia says and everything else is fake. They know that from both sides there are fakes and that this is happening and this is happening, and they are actually and sincerely, that wasn't there before as far as I observed, but something triggered in this group, which turned out to be quite large, about this feeling of patriotism and greatness and some kind of mission Russia is onto. And interestingly enough, that the understanding of what that mission is might differ among them, but they share this authentic, I would even say, sentiment very much. And they actually leave their jobs, go to the front line, volunteer there, they donate money and stuff, and they do it, and then they have these blogs and etc. etc. There are not many of them, but I encountered one of them on the recent event I've been to. He was a public speaker there because it was also a state-sponsored event, and I was observing there. And as much as I hated what that person did and said, I cannot deny how sincere he was in that. And then there are people, for instance, a friend of mine who is also very intelligent, and never did he support the Putin regime, and he actually worked his own life in the domains of building horizontal communities, giving power back to the people and to the communities, working in alternative education. So never did he support the Putin regime, never did he support the autocracy. He understands it all, yet he is triggered by the war and in a way supports it, because it so happened that from 2014 until the invasion, he encountered some Ukrainians who had to flee Ukraine, which also happens, and that's also there, who actually encountered, being ostracized up to the point of violence for their pro-Russian or even just pro-Russian language position in Ukraine.
Right.
Well, I assume that those are rather rare cases, but this person just encountered them one by one. And so that molded,
created a narrative in his mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so in a sense, that's a diverse group.
Yeah. And I guess that's what makes it more difficult to I guess, unpack and challenge, because there are and again, it's interesting, and I wonder what you think. I mean, it seems to me, and I know there's research to back this up, that the moment one's identity is threatened, that identity galvanizes. And we saw this in Ukraine especially as well, right? I mean, the moment Ukrainian identity was threatened, certainly post February last year, it became stronger than ever, and the sense of one.
True.
And I wonder if that's what you're describing there as well in the Russian context, which is not something that we dare to contemplate in the West, that this is part of the natural human reaction, is to, rally around the flag.
In a sense. And one could even argue that, well, that's a risky thing I'm going to say, that just as Russia, in a very violent way, served Ukraine in solidifying their identity and their sense of belonging and their readiness to actually, serve for the country. And I mean, Ukraine, as far as I feel, maybe that's also just shaped by my Ukrainian friends whom I listen to and share some sentiment with them. But Ukraine, all through all the horrors it's going through right now, it has a huge transformation potential, partly due to the war and because the nation got solidified and all that. And one could even argue that, in a sense, that also served Russian society or potentially can serve Russian society, because that national identity, which has been actually kind of marginalized since the fall of the Soviet Union, so it was on a decline, and there was actually not much for people to unite around. Neither the war, the military, and like us against them, nor something constructive that we are going to do this or that as a nation.
Like Race for the Moon or things like that.
I mean, like this. Yeah. Or just even engaging in the way we build our society. I mean, this depoliticization and being staying out of politics and this bystander syndrome kind of a thing, that's also part of that. We don't feel as one, so why bother?
Yeah.
And the war also obviously, the war, what did it do? It also triggered this sense of unity within Russian society. And unfortunately, that mostly got, usurped, I don't know, by the war supporters.
Yeah.
And that's what the war opposers face as a challenge now. I mean, they also want to play on that sense of unity, on that, like, okay, we can change it, we can do it together. But there is a feeling that this whole sense of belonging to the country, to the nation, and being in right of representing it and being together is kind of on that side.
Yeah.
So it belongs to them only. And there is even, I mean, among the war opposers, there is even this hidden feeling that it's been stolen from us.
Yeah.
The right to be patriotic is stolen from us. The country is stolen from us. So it's there. And like another thing is that it actually, I mean, one could even say there is a civic war going on in Russia right now because of how huge this polarization is. I mean, it's not violent at the moment, but in a sense, it's only not violent because it's pressured down and, by the censorship and everything. But the polarization, which is so huge, is there. And I guess it's been there. And the war triggered it to be more open, to be more visible. So it's like, the wound which was hidden and then it bursts out. And that's painful and potentially even lethal, but that's also relief and a way for body to heal. Might be. Or might not become.
That's right. Yeah, it might be, depending on how it unfolds. That's absolutely right.
Right.
I really find it interesting, this tension between the two sides. That one side, the nationalist side, is perceived as the one that represents the state. It's captured, it's stolen the flag, and it has taken the flag as the symbol of the nation. Whereas those who oppose the war are now anti-flag or anti that particular history, culture. They're the sellouts. And that tension, I mean, I think that tension is relevant, again, globally, particularly as this kind of populist movement rises. Right. But of course, in Russia, we're seeing that manifest in a much more brutal way towards their neighbor. You made the point that it's hard.
The flag is very ironically symbolic here, because you might have heard of it. When the anti-war movement, those who left the country started to try to, gather and assemble in different countries, they happened to be. And one of the biggest, organization out of them, so they came up with this new flag of Russia, which was white and blue, but without red, symbolizing that we are denying the violence and stuff that Russia represents, leaving only blue and white. Which is good and I mean, non-violent and all that. The idea is good, but basically what they say is that we are not them. We are not Russia. We don't want that flag. We are something different. And I mean, unless you are powerful enough to actually build such a huge new thing which can replace the old, you're just denying it. And you're saying, okay, we are separate.
So you're not really changing anything at the core. You're merely removing yourself from having a seat at the table, right? Because
because it's so painful to be there. It's so painful to be identified with that, so you rather just break it. But then your chance to change it also gets wasted.
And it's also coming from, it's also the resistance one feels from the rest of the world, or at least certainly the Western world. If you gather somewhere with a Russian flag, even as an anti-war movement, you will immediately be associated with the pro-war movement. You made an interesting point about the censorship. And again, that's something that we hear about and talk about and perhaps even have an idea or can visualize what that means. But it'd be interesting to hear what censorship means in Russia. What does that look like? When you say you walked outside and you see the propaganda and the posters, again, most of us have a vague idea of what that is, but perhaps it'd be useful to hear from you how broad, how all-encompassing that is, and what it actually means to the everyday Russian, to that grandma that you mentioned, to the old lady that you mentioned, and everyone else around, or at least, the 68%, the middle, that's just kind of sticking their head in the sand. What does that look like to them?
Well, let me see. I guess there are a couple of layers here. One is that the government hugely funds and therefore occupies the public space with the propaganda in different mediums, from posters to TV shows and videos and everything. Most of them, I would say that actually once you go to the street, most of them are not even propaganda of those Ukrainians are, deserve to be and stuff. It's mostly just them trying to recruit people to the army because that's something they're struggling with. So nowadays in Moscow, for instance, you have these posters of, hey, join the army. On literally every single organization, the cafeteria, the shop, like anything, just every door, the local administrations, they come to the owners, they give them the posters and they say, you have to post it. So it's just like, and once you just watch the billboards, I guess half of the billboards are basically the promotion of joining the army, which kind of shows how much nervous and anxious they are about recruitment and mobilization. Because they also are very anxious about still rolling out another wave of general large-scale mobilization, because that obviously frightens people and that destabilizes the regime. And the regime still holds on being passive. So it still doesn't want people to be active, even if they are actively supporting the war. It still prefers them to be just, leave us do our own thing. So that's one layer. And then obviously once, I haven't watched TV in years, so I cannot be a direct witness. But from what I hear, TV is just like 99% fueled with this huge propaganda, and most of that is, I don't have words to describe it. The last time I watched some of those shows just as a out of curiosity, I cannot really imagine how a normal human being could watch it, because it's just so much fueled by hatred, by hysteria. It's just nonsense. But then TV is researched to be the main media source, mostly for the elderly people only. And most of the rest, just use different sources. And then there is legal and, obviously then there is a criminalization of any public opposition to war. There are a couple of laws, and they can basically get you to prison for a couple of decades at worst. And it's really unclear how massive this is. I mean, there were obviously waves, especially in the beginning when there were the protests, and then a couple of waves after that when huge amounts of people got into prison. And then they kind of, as far as I understand and see, they kind of try to, keep everyone alert. So they put one person in jail every couple of months for a decade. And you cannot really say that one person a month is a lot, but since it's public, and so, that's just a way to threaten.
Yeah, well, if it's publicized and if everyone knows, then it's
and the thing you cannot really, you can't predict. You can be a politician who has a huge social capital who are against the war, and then you're in prison. But then you could be just a father of a girl who drew a Ukrainian flag in school, and then the father got jailed and is still in jail, and he's sentenced for a decade or so, and his daughter is given to the orphanage. Or you could be a shop owner who also, drew the flag on his shop. Or, you can't. It's unpredictable. It's
which is what makes it scary.
There seems to be no.
Yeah, but that's part of it. Yeah, that's part of it, right? Keeping the uncertainty alive.
But then it doesn't. Right. But then still, it doesn't seem to be massive, at least at the time, when you just see, hundreds and thousands of people being jailed every month. And so it's, but, there are no protests. If there would be, then the picture might be different. And then there is technical censorship, which is, they basically legally closed all the independent media, and then they try to technically ban them. Block the websites and applications and stuff, so you can only access them through VPN, and that also shrinks their audience. And then they try to block VPNs as well nowadays. Rumors say in the last couple of days that they are trying to block YouTube, as the Facebook is already blocked. And VPNs keep, dying because this protocol is now blocked, and people who keep, those who want to keep their access to those sources of information, they can, but that takes more and more effort.
And then more and more technical know-how.
And then there are obviously, and that's a very good example, I guess, that's something which we kind of took on from the Belarus experience. More and more teams are developing decentralized VPN tools for people to access information, so it's free, and they're coming up with a new technical solutions and stuff, and it's like those are social projects. Those are not private corporate VPNs, which are meant to make money from them. And many of the teams I know who are developing these tools, they are the teams consisting of Russian, Ukrainian, and Belarus engineers and software guys within the team.
Doing it as a social project. Yeah. as a social And what about the what is the impact of the casualties, right? Because we, at least in the West, hear figures of up to 200,000, if not dead, but certainly wounded. I mean, these are serious numbers that one would expect would hit home in Russia as to the severity of this war, if nothing else but just this number of sons and perhaps even daughters of Russia that are being killed inevitably on foreign land. How is that received? Are those numbers even remotely publicly acknowledged or whispered even amongst the people?
Not at all.
No, okay.
Publicly, it's all completely hidden. There are only the numbers published by the Ministry of Defense, which is like, I know what they say,
20,000,
just a couple of people.
Not even.
It's kind of whispered, but that's obviously censored, but that also feels kind of a taboo in society. One of the reasons, I guess, is that most of a huge percentage of the recruits were actually from the remote regions of the country for different reasons, for the financial incentives and stuff, and they mostly tried to keep the huge cities, and especially Moscow and St. Petersburg, more or less intact, I would say. And those remote regions, they also don't have, much capacity for protests or anything. They're like, here it is. Individually speaking, when you just, I watched a couple of interviews, for example, with mothers whose sons died, and then there are all very diverse picture of how it happens. There are mothers literally rescuing their sons who, by ignorance, got involved on the front line, just like literally rescuing them on the time they were on the rotation, and them hiding them and stuff. And then there are those who are like, UK, but he served the nation. Perhaps that was for a reason. At least we get the money. And that's also there. Incomprehensible to me and to many, but true. But mostly that's somewhere below the even semi-public, what people whisper on the streets and talk to each other about.
That's interesting. That I think that's a.
But that's part of the no one believes the numbers by the Ministry of Defense. Like, everyone is sure there are many people who are dead. That's the overall feeling. It's just that we don't talk about what it implies.
Yeah, because it implies action. And action is costly. Action comes with exit costs that are perhaps too great and risks that are perhaps too great to take, especially if you're in this this kind of middle 60 to 70% that is largely unaffected by the war. I mean, broadly speaking, I imagine everybody is to an extent affected. But if your son is not fighting, if your son is not dying, if your daughter's not dying, what is the impact of the kind of more recent drone attacks, even in Moscow and St. Petersburg and other regions in Russia? Is this bringing, I guess, the war closer to home to those who remain with their head in the sand?
Surprisingly not, and that shocks me, to be honest.
Wow, okay.
One of the first drones that flew into Moscow actually blew up a couple of kilometers from the place I stay.
Wow, okay.
And, I'm anti-war and pacifist activist, so I had this very weird feeling of, on the one hand, feeling kind of insecure that the next day it might fly and blow up into my balcony, which I guess wouldn't be so pleasant. But there is also a part of me which is like, let it happen. At least it comes here and we see that it's actually happening, not somewhere in the distant place, but at least that will wake people up. But then most of them it was, and obviously the narrative and the strategy in the news was also mostly to try to talk it down. So they didn't use it to fuel propaganda even more, like, those Ukrainians, we need to unite. No, they try to, nothing's happening, it's all fine.
Wow.
And I guess that's different for the people living in the Bryansk region, closer to the border, because they're being attacked every day, and there are people dying like every month. and they're also out of public discourse. So it's like, it's happening there. We don't care.
So what does it look like from your perspective? How does this unfold from your view?
All right, there is something in the process work psychology, they call it the high dream, which is kind of a hope, but not just a rational one, but something you can aspire to, and that also has some intuition in it. So there is a hope that once this cup, which has been placed on the social frictions and polarization and conflicts within the society, is taken off for some reason. It could be the fall of regime. It could be the defeat in the war, but the regime staying. It could be something else. But there is this high dream that it might happen in some recent future. And then if that happens, that's going to be naughty. That's not going to be nice and beautiful for sure. It's not that the regime is falling. Now finally we are free and we can build democracy and be in peace with each other and with the world. No, that's, with such a level of tension and polarization in society. And that's where I guess this civic facilitation in a broad sense is going to be urgently needed. To try to make these bridges and to build and foster dialogue within society which is polarized. So it's one thing to try to foster it within the society where it's censored and put down, and it's a different thing when it's the wound is burst out, and now you need to deal with it.
The
and that's why we
narrative has
started
collapsed.
this course as well.
Yeah.
And all the tensions which were there already. And then there is also a feeling that to be honest, it's really hard to foresee this change in the nearest future because it seems so encircled. The war itself doesn't change in the last, a year, I would say, with not much changes on the front line and being this, what they call it, situational battles and stuff. And within the country, within society also, it's only, the knot is getting even tighter in a sense.
There's one other thing I want to pick up before we get to this social kind of dialogue initiatives. And that is, just recently, I think it was actually yesterday or the day before that I saw, two things that spring to mind. Firstly, that now it's going into high schools, that high school students are now being trained in the use of Kalashnikovs, hand grenades, and UAVs or drones. That's one question I have, whether you've heard that, if that's true, and how is that perceived more broadly, or how is it interpreted? What does it say to the everyday Russian when this is, I guess, back in schools? Because we know of this from World War II, etc. So what is this actually saying to the Russian population? But secondly, also, even just today's the 8th of September, I just saw on the news that there's whispers of perhaps the Kremlin considering, as in, members of the Kremlin considering deposing Putin. Whether there's any truth to that, maybe not even today, but in the kind of near future, perhaps your thoughts on those 2 points.
Well, first, they were getting it to schools and even kindergarten and universities for the last, since the beginning of invasion, largely and on a large scale. And before that, since 2014, maybe a little bit slower.
Right.
And from propaganda, we see children in the kindergarten. Those perhaps also are exceptional cases. It's not something which is happening everywhere in every single kindergarten, but we've seen these pictures of children in the kindergarten being put in this Z letter and then in the military uniform and stuff. And in schools, they have for 2 years now, they have this additional lesson, which is to be conducted weekly for everyone, which is called discussions on the important things, which is supposed to be the propaganda talks. And then they changed the school books this year, the history book, the what they call it, civic science, and I guess something else. Well, basically they also changed it all with the propaganda. They put the chapters on the current invasion, which they call the special operation and stuff, and fascism and Ukraine and all that. And I mean, there were many laughters about it. Also in the exams on the civic science for the high school students, they took out the questions about democracy, which is like, I mean, but that's just how absurd it is. And then in the universities, they also have it. They have these talks. They have, well, obviously they have students being expelled if they demonstrate their anti-war, anti-Putin position and stuff like that. Also for a couple of years now, and teachers. And some of the teachers who have been expelled in the last couple of years and left the country, they already organized these horizontal, informal, self-organized, independent universities, and they now give lectures and talks, and then the government censors them and tries to put them down and stuff, and call them the foreign agent and prohibits the organization. For instance, one of the free university, which is from those teachers from academia who has been expelled, they are now this year called extremists, and it's illegal to engage with them in any way. Stuff like that.
Wow.
Yeah, and the military training itself, also, I guess the law is passed that from this year it's going to be in schools, and then it's always a question of how it's implemented. Because now, you try to pass it top down from the government, and then it's implemented in all the different ways, depending on school, depending on teachers. Then some teachers just also, try to boycott those lessons or try to talk about something else there because it's kind of vague what you consider to be important, and talks about the important stuff. And but some do, and some follow it, and some students follow it, and some students oppose the teachers, and they record the video and audio, and they spread it publicly within the teenagers and stuff. So that all is happening.
So internal policing, so to say, or internal moderation.
Which is both ways.
Yeah.
I mean, on one way, if you are a teacher who dare to, start talking about the critical thinking and something against the war, you can be recorded, and as internal police, someone will shot a video of you and sent to the government, or vice versa. You could be a teacher who starts to put propaganda on children, and children will record it and they will spread it and they will laugh at you. Well, obviously there is no one to
arrest you,
to put sanctions yet, but I mean, they just publicly laugh at you, which also is happening. And children overall turned out to be more resilient to propaganda than many assumed. So most of them, especially teenagers, were like, what the shit are you talking about? Do you really expect us to believe that? And
right.
It differs, but
there is a significant portion.
And
of
then
them.
most of them, true. And I mean, the effort itself is huge, and it's everywhere. The pressure is everywhere. And you cannot really, I mean, then children got to express their opinions in hidden ways, secretly, not publicly. Otherwise, they are also at risk of being expelled or their parents being imprisoned, as it happened with some of them. And then I guess most of the parents who are against war and against the regime but have to stay in the country, they try to somehow just, protect the children from that. Either talk with them about, okay, this is going to happen in school, but you don't have to attend. We are going to write this letter that you are sick and you will not attend the lessons and stuff like that. Or they just take children out of schools. It's actually been, well, not huge, but significant increase of children going to the family education, so getting out of school and transitioning to the home education instead.
Like homeschooling,
in the last 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, there are so many different aspects of this that are concerning, worrying, especially when the oppression is
so deep. It's interesting,
please go.
It's almost an anecdote here. Last year, I was also on the event working with the administration of the pedagogical universities. And that was the time they introduced the law that now the pedagogical universities need to prepare students to be in this new position, which is called, I guess, how do you translate it? Not educational activities. Well, basically the kind of heads of upbringing and value-based and propaganda, if you read, in between the lines in schools. And so therefore pedagogical universities need to prepare their students to be in that positions. And all of them on the one hand were super excited about it, because that's something, turns out, many within the government system, and I mean not the officials, but the schools, let's say, or the universities, turns out many actually need some kind of coherent value-based ideology to unite us so much. And they're like, yeah, finally we can work on that. Finally we can not just, upbring cynical people who are just after making careers and money, but actually find out something that unites us together. And once they start talking about it, even though the law kind of implies this propaganda and war and stuff, they're like, yeah, we will talk about how they can create social projects and change the society and make us a more democratic country and do this and that and social enterprises and, and make it a more just community and be self-independent critical thinkers who can collaborate and work in teams and all that good stuff. And then someone comes from the officials and like, here is what they've got to do. And they're like, okay.
Yeah, completely. Yeah.
And I'm not sure how exactly that combines in their head, but
yeah, the cognitive dissonance must be great.
We need ideology.
Yeah.
And we're like, we need ideology. We want ideology. We want something to unite us. Okay, let us talk about ideology. No. We'll just wait for someone to put it on us from above. So there is this need, which is, I guess, sincere, authentic, and actually very healthy
and
for
well-intentioned
individuals and for society.
Yeah.
And well-intentioned for sure. And then there is fear. I mean, that's a good thing if they would actually discuss and talk and have this dialogue about what kind of ideology they could have, which they would like to translate to their pupil and children and stuff. But instead,
they wait to be served with the narrative.
And they are, for some reason, well, I more or less understand why, but they are afraid to go into the dialogue when I, as a moderator, tried to, provoke them into the dialogue of what kind of ideology you would like to create. They were like, no, let's not go there. Because it's not authorized.
Okay. Again, the price is too high. The price for speaking one's own critical mind is perhaps too high. And this is perhaps a good way to pivot to this kind of civic dialogue in society that you run and create with the open forums. So what are open forums, firstly? And what are you achieving? Who is attending open forums? Why do they attend? What do they hope to achieve? And then, of course, what are the challenges? What are what are some of your concerns about these open forums?
Yeah. Well, so long story short, open forum is a format from the process-oriented psychology, which is a branch of psychodynamic psychological approach created by Arnold Mindell. And that's basically a format where you have the dialogue between people, and that's a way to have a heated dialogue on something which, you have conflict around or tension around. So it's not, a peaceful talk. And a way to have it where you focus not only on what people think and their rational arguments, so it's not a debate. You also focus on feelings, which are considered to be important, but you also focus on something they call the roles in the field. So you don't just see the particular people with their opinions and feelings as individuals, but also the roles that people occupy and they get into this group or that group, this role or that role, and sometimes they can even change, and sometimes they can even change within the format.
When you say roles, do you mean specific roles in society that they feel, or identities and that they embody, that they represent?
More or less identities, but you could also call them voices. You could call them, societal,
avatars,
voices. Avatars.
Yes.
Here it's, if you go more, esoteric kind of. And they also have something they call ghost roles, for instance, opinions or feelings or voices which are tabooed or censored or unpopular, or you cannot really pronounce them, or they are not present within this group, but they also influence the dialogue and they influence the conversation. And then someone, for example, the facilitator or some of the participants can actually occupy that role and speak on behalf of that role. So not only my own mind, but see this kind of thing.
Great.
And
great.
So the story, it started with the invasion. First couple of months after the invasion started, international process work psychologists, some of them, they tried to convene global open forums on the Ukrainian war, where everyone could attend, Russians, Ukrainians, as well as the rest of the people. And after 2 of them, it got clear that we cannot do it at the moment. The dialogue between Russians and Ukrainians and everyone else just is not going because of obvious reasons. And one of the reasons was that, well, there were people from the Ukrainian side and there were people from the Russian side, but all of them were against the war. So most of what Ukrainians wanted and had to say to the Russians was not actually addressed to those people who were present in the forum. So it was kind of miscommunication.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that? As in...
I mean, Ukrainians were, you Russians attack us and you think you're a great empire. And then there are those people those Russians on the forum who are against the regime, against the war, like, well, it's not actually us. And the only thing they could do is try to play the role of the war support in Russian or the Putin or whoever, which is, well, that was needed as well, but not exactly what
it didn't achieve what
the,
okay, I understand. Yeah.
I mean, the Ukrainians had a space to tell what they needed to tell, and that was important as well to be witnessed by the international community, by the Russians. I mean, that was just the beginning of it. It wasn't unclear and it wasn't present everywhere, and it was waked and in this fog of war for everyone. So it was important. But then we could see that the dialogue between the countries is not possible at the moment. It's too hot. And then within Ukraine, they started to self-organize and they started create beautiful and healthy and many places for such dialogue within the Ukraine, and support groups, psychological groups, dialogue groups, open forums within the community to talk about the stuff they had. Because, I mean, they weren't united all at once after the invasion started. It was also a gradual process, and there were many polarizations and conflicts and this and that, and the conflict between those who left Ukraine and those who stayed, all of that. And they had this, and they started doing it in a very beautiful way. And I had my colleagues, Ukrainian psychologists and process workers, who were facilitating these forums, and like that was going on there in a very active manner. And it also got sparked because of the invasion. I mean, that suddenly became very relevant. And they had fundraising and resources for that and stuff. And in Russia, silence. I just had one person trying to organize such a forum once, but it basically turned out to be just a gathering for people who know each other, like 7 of us or something, who spoke with each other. And the atmosphere of silence in society was the most present one. And so I felt, okay, I want to break this silence, and I want to create the space for this dialogue, at least in Russia, within Russia, for Russians, maybe in a similar manner. And first, I invited a friend of mine, a colleague, a Swiss process work psychologist. Well, he also has connections to both Russia and Ukraine, but he's conducted seminars in Russia, and his wife is Russian, even though they live in Switzerland. So the 2 of us conducted 3 open forums in summer of 2022, and many people attended. I guess it was up to 80, 90 people at most.
Yeah.
And because it was so confusing and polarized and hot, I wouldn't really say that we had an actual deep dialogue. It was more of a break in the silence kind of thing. There were people sharing their emotions and their stories, and sometimes playing roles, but mostly sharing for, on behalf of themselves. And there were different people, those who are against the war mostly, some of them who are, well, if not necessarily supporting the war, but not fitting into the identity of the anti-war activist for sure, and be like, but I actually do love my country and I do want to stay with it, and I don't want to criticize it for everyone it is by its nature, as many anti-war activists did at the moment and stuff like that. So it was important. And by the end of summer, there was this feeling that, well, that colleague of mine, Rainy Hauser, he was like, okay, now I want to take a break. And there was also a feeling that the dialogue was happening, but it kind of was happening under the supervision of someone from outside. The Swiss, an old guy with kind of perceived authority, someone helping us to speak to each other. And we felt like, okay, we need to actually be able to talk to each other by ourselves. And then I started doing this open forums bi-weekly, just by myself, and sometimes some friends of mine and colleague from Russia joining as co-facilitators. Now, the thing is that most of them, 90% of the attendants were anti-war people. Even though I tried to invite them, I tried to keep the space open. I even invited once in a while, intentionally, those people I know who are supporting the war to attend. Most of them never did. And that's part of that mirror bubble, mirror ostracizing. They feel that once they come, it's insecure for them to be in that space and to speak publicly. But sometimes some of them do come, and that was also a point of a dialogue. But mostly that turned out to be a space for dialogue for very different people with general anti-war position to talk and work on different things which appear. From the topic of helplessness, which was a huge theme throughout the year, just not seeing what we can do. Anything. The topic of guilt, obviously, and many people having hard feelings about feeling guilty and being attacked from all the sides, from the Russian side for being traitor, from Ukrainian side for being Russian, and there was a topic of victory, for instance. On the 9th of May, we did the forum with the topic of victory, where we tried to speak about and feel into what victory actually is for us. Turns out that for those who support the war, it's completely unclear. There is no picture of victory. What exactly should happen for us to perceive it as a victory? And for those against the war as well, what exactly? Russia withdrawing the army from Ukraine. Okay, and then what? But what's victory for us? Not for Ukraine, but for us. The fall of regime, and what's next, and how it's going to happen. So it's also unclear, and there is no one is fighting for victory because there is no image of victory. Turns out. And then there was, for instance, a forum on the power and strength of pacifism, where we discovered that just as this sense of belonging to the country and patriotism was completely on the side of supporting the war, also the empowerment and the feeling that I have power, I have strength to do something, is also kind of usurped by that camp and associated with violence. So it's a violent power. And those who are against war and for peace, they're kind of, we cannot exercise power. We don't feel a right to. That's also stolen from us. And so we had on this how we as, pacifists of different kinds can be powerful and strong and not just anemic.
Yeah. And how can they be? I mean, I guess given everything we've spoken about so far, the oppressive environment that you find yourself in, where do you draw your power from? Where do you reject the weakness that's being attached to the cause, I guess, from the narratives surrounding your cause?
Well, one thing is a very fact you mentioned, like this high risks of me being public in like here in the podcast, not hiding my name and stuff. That's for me actually a personal way to remain my power, to do what can be and feels to be maybe risky, but still to do it, to be publicly against the war. And I mean, once again, I'm not, just going out on the streets screaming and putting posters and being in process and stuff. And it's not so much because of a fear, but because I don't see, any potential effect from that other than me being jailed.
Yeah.
But whenever I face this dilemma of fearfully hiding my position or being open about it, I try to choose and prefer the second one for my own sake, not for justice, not even for it's not even a moral thing. It's just my way of remaining in my power, of feeling that I can afford and be courageous enough and powerful enough to do that. So it's kind of saving myself.
Yeah.
And then trying to go to the other side to have this dialogue and try to understand them and try to see the feelings behind those figures that support the war, which for me is actually much more difficult than, just publicly speaking my own position, because that triggers me once I encounter it.
Of course.
And then seeing that figure within me. For instance, that last event I mentioned where there was a guy who was very sincere and authentic about his support of the war. He volunteered, went to the front line. He actually is an ex-marketing specialist and branding specialist. And he was talking about how should we within the country now market the war and market patriotism and make the mythology and brand of us as a strong nation based on war. And he believed in that so sincerely and stuff, and I couldn't really deny it. And I've listened to them to half an hour. And I could clearly identify that even though I won't do that, but symbolically and psychologically, I actually want to kill him for what he's doing and for what he's creating. And that's a killer within me. Because it's so unbearable to witness and to be present together with what he represents and what he is building. And so, finding the killer within me, finding the one who needs to belong within me, and maybe I choose not to belong to this identity of the country or the nation, but instead I depend on belonging to the anti-military group and identity. Or finding the aggression within me, finding a savior within me. Actually, there is a part of me which really feels that we need to complete some mission. Well, I would rather prefer this mission to be something more peaceful and constructive, and but there is this, and others would actually call it colonialism of me, trying to do something for the whole globe. Who am I to do so? Which is also partly true. So finding all these parts and maybe hoping that might help to build this dialogue between the camps and between the different people and conflicting parties within Russia, to see that actually there are similar intentions and feelings and archetypes that drive us, even though they drive us to the opposing sides.
It's so interesting because, again, it echoes everything you said right at the start about meeting your Ukrainian counterparts and having this sense of unity and a sense of belonging and togetherness, which is then driven apart by one instance, right? And what you're describing now is exactly what's happening to you in Russia, where you have a sense of belonging. But this one narrative, this one perspective, one identity that one chooses to embrace, or one is in some way forced to embrace. Because if this is all you hear and this is all you see, then how can we expect an everyday Russian to have the perspective that you have? Somebody who's been exposed to the kind of, well, not just the psychological dimensions of what happens in the mind, but also having met people from various countries, segments of society, having had different perspectives, seen different views. Somebody who hasn't had the luxury of that, it's very easy for us to cast them out and say they're evil, which is what broadly happens in the West, right? This is very...
Right.
It's very easy in the West. There's a tendency to think that that all Russians are culpable and guilty and all Russians are evil. And of course, that's not the case. The old lady you mentioned during our discussion, nice, lovely lady, but that doesn't mean that she's serving a cause that is ultimately bringing out very, very bad outcomes for everybody involved. She doesn't think so. That's why the old adage, the path to hell is paved with good intentions, right?
Yeah.
It is so true in these kinds of circumstances. Is it even possible, or how do you measure the impact of your initiatives? Is this even possible that you can measure any kind of impact, or how far-reaching it is? How many people are you able to touch and even create a bumper in their mind that perhaps 1 in 10 might think about things differently?
That's a tough one. And on a bad day, I feel that my impact is close to zero and I'm impacting nothing, and I'm just in my illusions of trying to do something, and I just can't bear helplessness, which is actually here. And I guess to some extent that's true. That most of the people I directly work with or try to influence are already those with anti-military positions, so I'm not changing the minds of those who are supporting the war. Well, at least maybe I'm not even changing the minds of those who are against the war to be more complex in their perception so that we can build a dialogue, but actually among us all, including me, increasing this complexity that one day might allow us to embrace the whole polarization and the whole conflict. And that's a typical challenge and question that is risen in every single civic, anti-war, democratic kind of gathering I attended or organized in the last couple of years. Should we invite those into the dialogue? And there is this huge desire to say no, because it's so hard to talk to them, with them, and it's not clear what to talk with them about. But then if you don't invite them, nothing's happening.
Well, you're missing one of those roles, right? You're missing one of those identities in the dialogue.
And it stays. It doesn't go anywhere. There was there is this famous cartoon which was very famous in the 90s in Russian-speaking part of the world, called Masyanya. And it's been out for a while. Everyone kind of forgot about it, and after the invasion, the author actually started doing the episodes again, now on war. He's clearly anti-war, pro-Ukrainian, and it's like political, sarcastic episodes. And they just highlight this, these deep intentions that we have. So in the end of the one of the episodes, all the good people with the UFOs and help from the aliens, they just put all those who want to have war on the island, and they kill each other and stuff. So, there is a part of me which actually wishes this to happen. However, unrealistic and then okay, we actually need to be more mature if we are about to change this. So perhaps what I'm trying to achieve with these forums and course and everything is to explore together how we can mature, including me and those I'm working with, so that we can change it. So that we are changing it. And that also includes how we, for example, within the course are creating the war dynamic within the group. and how these roles are represented and expressed within the group, even though we are all, for civic rights and anti-war and stuff, but then we start have this subtle oppression and then we explore this. And to be honest, I have no answer how exactly it's gonna influence and if it's gonna influence and if it influences the status quo right now. Yeah. And the funny thing is that that's something that came to me with the war and with this work of mine, which wasn't there before. But I feel that I also matured in a sense that now it's okay for me to keep doing it because I assume that it might be right without knowing or having anything to assure me that it's right and it's gonna, work and influence. Like, I don't know, and it's okay, and still I'm gonna do that. That kind of feeling.
Yeah, that's powerful because that's comes from deep within oneself. So it's not about doing it for someone, or as you said before, because it's the right thing to do or not the right thing to do. All of that almost becomes irrelevant. It is because it is fueled by intrinsic motivations, to do something. And if whatever it does is more than was there before, it's having a seat at the table. It is not letting the narrative be taken from you. It is not letting the flag being taken from you, so to speak. And for that reason, I find everything you're doing so powerful. And perhaps one last question to you. Given the importance of this being a local dialogue, in this instance, perhaps what you're describing is an internal Russian dialogue between the various bubbles in Russia to try and find a cohesive whole of what victory looks like, what the future looks like, what ideology we embrace, who we are as a people. How do those outside of Russia, not even Ukraine, but outside of Russia and Ukraine, help you do what you do without tarnishing you with the brush of being anti-Russian, so to speak, right? So, even this podcast, right? I know there will be a portion of those who listen who will say, he's just and certainly on Twitter, he is just a Kremlin apologist, right? I have no doubt. But then there will be a significant portion of those who hear the emotion in your voice and recognize the humanity that you represent. They will want to help. How can they do it without making your life harder?
That's a good one. A couple of things. One is I can imagine, being in a seat of someone actually influencing some initiatives or politics or something in whatever country, which tries to support peace, and then it's supporting Ukraine, supporting the Ukrainian army, which I think is the right way to do, the right thing to do, and then isolating Russia with sanctions and all the different ways to isolate it, which is a very understandable thing to do. I mean, once you see this aggressor who is just, breaking all the rules and using the power of right of force and stuff, and you just want to isolate yourself from it. Very understandable. I try to do it myself. I battle with that, but I try to isolate myself from those supporting the war.
Same.
But that's not a sensible thing to do if you really try to influence. So if you instead try to support any kind of civic anti-war dialogue, independent media, VPNs, these kind of initiatives in Russia, and try to keep these bridges, then you are working for perhaps, I'm not sure, but perhaps you're working against Kremlin and for the peace. But one needs to be very accurate here. And for me, the examples of the horizontal marginal teams which are creating these projects like VPNs and stuff, which are international teams, usually including Russians, Ukrainians, Belarus people, and some others. Those are great example. That's one thing on the like policy level or stuff, you know. Then it's kind of a metaphor from the therapeutic, psychotherapeutic field, which comes to my mind. But there, what really matters is the role of the witness. When, for instance, you work with someone's trauma, it's very powerful if there is a good intended witness that doesn't try to rescue or save or banish or punish or whatever, but just with a good intention witnesses the process. That's like, you know, the role of the surrounding community, witnessing the conflict taking place and trying to be there, be present, and you know, see what's going on without turning away from it. So that's more of a symbolical act. It's not clear, you know, what exactly you need to do to be a witness. But I guess even with the open forums, actually, I think maybe soon, maybe this autumn, if I keep doing them, I will try to invite international witnesses to the process to see if it changes the dynamics. You know, not even to participate, but just to observe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know, there is this very tricky thing that, in a way, I guess, Russian invasion of Ukraine is a part of the global process, after all, of the global polarizations going on. And we mentioned a couple of those, like, you know, mistrust to the government, mistrust to media, postmodern culture and all that. And on the one hand, it's really important, I think, to see this war and this conflict in the context of the larger frame. It's not just one exceptional thing we need to resolve, and then the rest stays as it is. In a way, that's a symptom of what's going on in the global system. So we need to, you know, take that into account. But one needs to be very accurate here, because Kremlin uses and utilizes in its propaganda these cracks and tensions in the global context and in the global discourse. Like, for instance, it uses this post-truth kind of thing just to say that, oh, you know, this war crimes in Bucha, we don't know the truth because it's post-truth, no one knows the truth, so it doesn't even try to convince that this is the way we believe things happened. Instead, it tries to utilize this no one knows the truth.
Sows a seed of doubt,
Or,
right?
Or it's like, you know, there is this crisis of Western liberal democracy. Well, is there such a crisis? I guess there is. But then instead of trying to find ways to work on that, we're like, okay, then instead we are going to attack this very model and see that we are something else, but we are not the solution. We're just, you know, the remnant of the authoritarian traditional regime. So it utilizes, unfortunately, this global context in its own, for its own sake. So that's very, you know, subtle balance of seeing it within the larger framework without playing the game of Kremlin propaganda, which also does it.
Vlad, I knew this would be a powerful interview, and it certainly was. I'm in awe of what you do, especially in the courage of what you're doing. And if there is any websites you can give me, anything that I can post as part of the show notes, that perhaps those who wish to support, can support, want to support, can do so, then you and I can exchange those after this, and I'll certainly put them up there as part of the show notes. But thank you firstly for the work you're doing. If this podcast can bear or act the role of that witness, even in the slightest sense, then I think I will have achieved my aim with the show, especially given what's happening in Ukraine right now. To have somebody speak from, well, Moscow, from the heart of the, I guess, invading army, so to speak, but to speak so candidly about the paradox of this particular war and the tensions within Russia itself was hugely beneficial to me, and I hope to the audience as well. And we can only hope that it at least fans one or two flames they can keep burning to try and keep that dialogue going and increase it ever so slightly. So thank you very much for what you do and for giving me so much of your time today.
Yeah, thank you too. And just as a last note, as you mentioned that, I felt like saying, being courageous and stuff, speaking from Moscow, from the heart of the invading country. At the same time, it's also my huge privilege to be speaking from Moscow, because being in the heart of the invading country, rockets are not falling on my head right now. Neither did they, apart from the drones, a couple of them in the last 2 years. So that's my challenge: how to use that privilege, being aware of that, how to use it responsibly. And maybe all of us, how to use the privilege that we have in the current context.
Very, very important point.
Thank you for having me. That definitely did serve as a witness, even for me. And just can't express my gratitude for hosting me and being the host from the capital H,
Thanks, Vlad. We'll be in touch. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Voices of War. And since you got this far, please take a moment to like and review the show wherever you get your pods. Thank you, and until the next time.